Hello friends, welcome to Tales Haven. I hope you find my story videos interesting and engaging. Please click on the subscribe button for more stories. Thank you as you do so. Sit back, relax as we dive into the story. Darren Cole was rich, richer than most people could ever imagine. But he wasn't happy. At 32, he had built his own tech company from the ground up. His face was often seen in business magazines. He owned luxury cars, traveled in private jets, and lived in a penthouse apartment that looked like something from a dream. People called him smart, successful, lucky, even perfect. But what no one ever saw was how lonely he felt. Darren's girlfriend, Vivian Hartley, was the daughter of one of the richest families in the country. Her father was a billionaire tycoon, and Vivian had been raised in a world of power, diamonds, and expectations. She was beautiful, fashionable, and loved attention. To the world, Darren and Vivian were the golden couple. But Darren had come to see the truth. Vivian didn't love him, she controlled him. She made decisions for him, spoke for him in public, corrected him at events, and always reminded him that she had more money, more status, more everything. "You're wearing that tonight?" she asked one evening as they were getting ready for a charity gala. Her voice was sharp like glass. "It's too plain. You're with me, Darren. Look the part." Darren stared at his reflection. He was already dressed in a black suit, tailored perfectly. Still, it wasn't enough for her. It never was. At the gala, Vivian smiled for the cameras, held his arm tightly, and whispered fake compliments in front of powerful people. But when the flashing lights faded and the car door shut, her smile disappeared. "You didn't say a word about my dress. You just stood there like a statue," she snapped. "You're supposed to support me, Darren, not stand there looking lost." He turned to the window and said nothing. He had learned long ago that arguing never worked. Vivian always won, not because she was right, but because she refused to lose. The car rolled on through the city lights, but Darren didn't feel present. He felt like a passenger in his own life. When they reached his apartment, Vivian got out first. "Come up when you're done sulking," she said without turning around. Darren sat there, the city buzzing outside, his hands gripping his knees. He had money. He had success. He had a woman the world admired. So why did he feel so hollow? He took a deep breath, then did something he hadn't done in years. "Drive me somewhere," he told the chauffeur. "Anywhere. Just go." The driver looked at him in the mirror. "Yes, sir." They drove through downtown, past the tall buildings, past the hotels and clubs, into the quieter part of the city. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier. The windshield blurred with droplets, and the streetlights turned into glowing smudges. At a red light, Darren spoke again. "Stop here." The driver hesitated. They were in a small, quiet neighborhood, not a place people like Darren usually visited. But he obeyed. Darren stepped out into the rain. No umbrella. No plan. Just the cold hitting his skin like tiny needles. He walked without thinking, letting his feet choose the path. He passed an old bookstore, a flower shop, and then a little corner café with a soft orange glow inside. The sign above read, "Bean and Bloom." Without a word, Darren pushed the door open. A small bell chimed. The warmth inside hugged him instantly. The smell of coffee, vanilla, and fresh bread filled the air. Soft music played in the background. A few people sat with laptops and steaming mugs, chatting or reading. Behind the counter stood a young woman. She was wearing a faded green apron and tying her curly hair back with one hand. She didn't notice him at first. She was busy wiping the counter and smiling at an older couple across the room. Then she turned and saw him. "Welcome," she said gently. Her voice was soft, kind, without judgment or curiosity. He looked down at himself. He was half-soaked, water dripping from his sleeves. She didn't flinch. "Rough night?" she asked, smiling again. Darren gave a small nod. "Well, you're in the right place," she said. "Come in. Sit anywhere you like. I'll bring you something warm." He didn't speak. He just obeyed. He chose a table near the window and watched her move behind the counter, calm, graceful, real. Minutes later, she brought over a mug of steaming chai with honey. "Try this." It's my favorite when I feel like the world's a bit too loud, she said, placing it down in front of him. He took a sip. It was perfect, warm, sweet, comforting. For a moment, the noise in his mind faded. She turned to leave, but he found himself speaking. What's your name? She paused, then looked back. Elena. Elena Reyes. He gave a small nod. Thank you, Elena. She smiled and walked away. Rain still tapped gently against the cafe windows. The soft music playing in the background had shifted to a slow piano tune. Darren stayed at his corner table, hands wrapped around the warm mug Elena had brought him. The chai had a hint of honey and spice, sweet, calming. Like her. He watched her from across the room, not in a creepy way, but with quiet curiosity. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply moved with purpose, kindness, and ease. She cleaned the empty tables with a small towel, wiped crumbs with her palm, smiled at a young boy struggling to sip hot chocolate through a straw. She even knelt beside a crying little girl to tie her shoelace when her mother had her hands full. Everything about her was gentle. Darren wasn't used to that. In his world, people were fast, sharp, loud. They moved for power, not for people. And yet here she was, Elena Reyes, making the world feel soft, if only for a little while. She passed by his table again. Can I get you anything else? She asked, her tone warm and sincere. He looked up at her, studying her features. Her eyes were a deep brown, like melted chocolate, full of warmth but carrying something heavier underneath, tiredness. Not the kind that comes from lack of sleep, but the kind that comes from life itself. No, he said softly. This is perfect. She gave him a nod, and her smile lingered just a second longer. Just then, the door swung open. A man in a wet suit stormed in, shaking his umbrella too close to the tables. Darren turned his head to look. The man stomped toward the counter, clearly in a mood. You got my order wrong again, he snapped, dropping a half-finished coffee on the counter. No foam. I said no foam. What is this, a joke? Elena stepped forward without fear. I'm really sorry, sir, she said gently. Let me fix that right away. Her tone didn't change. No hint of anger. No sign of stress. Even though the man was loud, even though a few customers were now watching. I've been here 5 times this week, the man continued, still fuming. And every single time, someone screws up my drink. I understand, she said softly, already turning to prepare a fresh one. Thank you for your patience. Darren stared. That one moment told him more about Elena than any conversation could. She didn't fight back. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't pretend to be perfect. She chose grace. That shook him. Vivian would have laughed in the man's face. Or had a manager fire Elena on the spot. Darren had seen it happen many times. Vivian didn't believe in humility. Only control. But Elena? She handled cruelty like a wave crashing against a rock. Unbothered. She returned to the angry customer with the corrected drink. Here you go, sir. No foam, double shot, extra hot. I hope this one's just right. The man grumbled, took it, and left without another word. Elena walked back to the counter, as if nothing had happened. Darren found himself rising from his seat. He approached the counter slowly. Elena was wiping down the espresso machine. That man, Darren began. He was rude. She glanced at him and shrugged lightly. Some people carry storms inside them, she said. You just try not to let it rain on you. Darren blinked. That was the most beautiful thing he'd heard in years. You're very kind, he said honestly. She chuckled softly. Kindness is free. And this job teaches you patience. You own this place? He asked. She shook her head. No. I just work here. Full-time. Sometimes I cover weekends too. Why? He asked. Not to pry, but because he truly wanted to know. Elena looked at him for a second, then decided to answer. My mom's not well. She needs care. Bills don't wait. So I work. There was no self-pity in her voice. Just truth. Straight and simple. Darren nodded. That's admirable. Elena raised an eyebrow, half amused. You talk like someone who's not from around here. He smiled. I'm not. I figured, she said. Most guys who wear suits like that don't drink tea in cafes like this. Darren chuckled. It was the first real laugh he'd had in a long time. She had a way of making honesty feel soft. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small card. His name and number were printed on it, but he scratched out the logo with his thumb. I'd really like to talk again. Not here. Maybe outside the cafe if you ever want to. Elena looked down at the card. She didn't take it right away. Instead, she met his eyes. I don't know your story, she said slowly. But you don't need to impress me. I'm not trying to, Darren replied. I just want to know you. She hesitated, then took the card, tucking it into her apron. I'll think about it, she said with a small smile. Darren nodded, his heart lighter than it had been in years. As he left the cafe and stepped back into the rain, the cold no longer bothered him. Because something warm had already begun to grow inside him. He was thinking about a girl named Elena, a girl who worked behind a cafe counter, who faced anger with calm and gave kindness without asking anything in return. He smiled to himself as the car picked him up. That smile, small and quiet, was the first honest smile he had worn in months. The next morning, Darren woke earlier than usual. He didn't plan to return to the cafe. But by 8:30 a.m. he was there, waiting at the same table, pretending to scroll through his phone. Elena walked in wearing a yellow sweater under her apron. Her hair was in a low braid this time, and she looked tired, but still managed to smile at every customer who walked in. When she spotted Darren, she paused. She tilted her head slightly, a curious smile forming. Back so soon? She asked as she wiped her hands on a towel. I like the chai, he said. And the atmosphere? She teased. And the person who brought it, he answered. She gave a soft laugh and walked behind the counter. That became a pattern. Darren kept coming back. Every morning. Sometimes he stayed only 15 minutes. Other times, an hour. He tried not to ask too many questions. He didn't push. He just came. And listened. He learned that Elena had grown up in that same neighborhood. That her mother had worked as a schoolteacher until her health began to fail. He learned that Elena loved poetry, hated thunderstorms, and made her own candles at home to save money. But more than what she said, Darren noticed how she made others feel. She remembered regulars' names, noticed when someone looked sad, gave free muffins to kids who had only coins in their hands. She even watered the cafe's small flower pots every morning, whispering, "Hang in there," like they were old friends. She was nothing like Vivian. Vivian wore diamonds and spoke like she owned the room. Elena wore secondhand sweaters and made space for everyone. One morning, Darren stayed behind after the morning rush. The cafe was quiet now. Only the sound of the coffee machine humming in the background. Elena was wiping down the counter when Darren stood up and walked over. He took a deep breath, reached into his pocket, and placed something on the counter. A small white envelope. Elena looked at it, then at him. What's this? Dinner, he said. A quiet place. Just us. No expectations. No cameras. I made sure of that. She didn't open it. Instead, she looked up, serious now. Why me? She asked softly. You don't even know me. I know enough, Darren said. I know your kindness isn't fake. I know you work hard, love quietly, and speak to people like they matter. I haven't seen that in a long time. She stayed quiet for a moment, then gently pushed the envelope back toward him. I'm sorry, Darren. I don't think I can. His heart dropped a little. Why? She didn't look angry. Just honest. Because I know your world. I've seen it. It's loud. Cold. Complicated. I've worked here long enough to serve people like you. People who smile and disappear. I'm not looking to be someone's side story. You're not, he said, his voice lower now. You're the first thing that's felt real to me in years. Elena's eyes softened, but she still shook her head. You don't need real. You need healing. I can't be your escape. There was no bitterness in her words. Only truth. Darren picked up the envelope, tucked it back into his coat, and gave a slow nod. Okay, he said quietly. But if you ever change your mind, I'll still be coming here. For the chai. And maybe a little more. Elena smiled. "A little more never hurt," she said gently. That night, Darren sat alone in his penthouse. The city lights blinked below like 1,000 tiny stars. The room was large, modern, perfect, and silent. He poured himself a drink and leaned against the glass wall. He had been with Vivian for over 4 years. There were gifts, parties, photo shoots, business trips. Everything looked flawless on the outside. But inside? He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt seen. But Elena had seen him. Not as Darren Cole, the millionaire. Just as a man. A tired, lonely man who didn't want gold. He wanted peace. And even though she said no, her gentle smile and soft rejection only made him more sure. She was worth waiting for. The next morning, Darren was quiet as he stared out the window of his penthouse. He had barely slept. His mind kept drifting back to the café. To Elena's voice, to her words, to her soft refusal. Even her no had been spoken with kindness, like she was protecting both of them. But what stayed with him most was that he wanted to go back again. Not to chase her. Not to impress her. Just to be near her presence, where things felt simple and honest. He made up his mind. He would still go. But what he didn't know was that someone else had already started watching him. Across the city, in a tall glass building, Vivian Hartley stood in her office with a sharp glare in her eyes. She was on a call with a private investigator she had quietly hired 3 days ago. Her voice was cold and direct. "Tell me everything. Where has he been going?" The man on the other end hesitated. "Miss Hartley, he's been visiting the same cafe every day for the past week. Same one. Same girl behind the counter. No bodyguards, no car. He walks in alone. Stays a while. Then leaves." Vivian's perfectly shaped eyebrows twitched. "A girl?" "Yes, ma'am. Early 20s. Tina. Name is Elena Reyes. No major background. Works full-time at the cafe. Lives with her sick mother in a rented apartment." Vivian narrowed her eyes. "Send me a photo." Seconds later, her phone buzzed. She opened it, and there it was. A grainy shot of Darren, sitting at a cafe table with a mug in hand, looking at a girl across the counter with a soft expression Vivian hadn't seen in months. Her grip tightened around the phone. This wasn't just some casual fling. This wasn't about coffee. This was dangerous. The next day, Elena arrived at the cafe early as usual. The sky was gray, and rain hung in the air again, but she didn't mind. Mornings were her favorite, quiet, peaceful, still. But as she stepped behind the counter, her manager handed her a folded note. This came in through the back door. "No name," he said with a shrug. Elena opened it. The handwriting was sharp, rushed, and cruel. "He's mine. Stay in your lane before you get hurt." She blinked. Her heart raced. She looked around, confused. No one else in the shop seemed to notice. No cameras. No one watching. Still, something about it sent chills up her spine. She folded it quickly and tucked it into her apron pocket. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the message, or the fact that someone knew about her and Darren. 2 days later, it happened. The cafe was busier than usual, the breakfast rush in full swing. Elena was behind the counter, handing out drinks with a smile, when the front door flew open. Vivian Hartley walked in like a queen stepping into a battlefield. High heels. Black sunglasses. Blood-red lipstick. She looked like a model in a war film. People turned to stare. Even the music seemed to fade. Vivian walked straight up to the counter and took off her sunglasses. Her eyes locked on Elena. "You must be Elena Reyes," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Elena froze. She knew instantly. This was her. "I don't know what you think you're doing," Vivian continued, her voice low and dangerous, "but you're playing a game you're not built for." Elena swallowed, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't want trouble." Vivian laughed. "Trouble? Honey, trouble is sleeping with someone else's man behind a cafe counter." "That's not what happened," Elena said calmly. "I never touched him. I've only ever served him tea." "Oh, please." Vivian rolled her eyes. "Men don't change routines for no reason. You're not just a cup of tea." Elena looked her in the eyes and spoke clearly. I didn't ask him to come. He came on his own. And if he chooses to leave you, maybe you should ask yourself why. Vivian's face turned red with anger. Without warning, she grabbed a hot coffee cup from the edge of the counter and flung it sideways. It smashed against the wall, splattering dark liquid everywhere. Customers gasped. One woman dropped her muffin. Elena didn't move. She stood still, shocked but calm. That was the moment Darren walked in. He saw the broken cup, the spilled coffee, the shocked customers. And then he saw Vivian standing there, breathing heavily, eyes wild. "Elena," he called, rushing to her side. "Are you okay?" She nodded slowly. Vivian turned toward him. "So it's true," she hissed. "You're really choosing this? This poor, pathetic girl from the street." Darren looked at her, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel fear or guilt or pressure. He just felt tired and done. "I'm not choosing her instead of you, Vivian," he said. "I'm choosing peace. I'm choosing honesty. I'm choosing myself." Vivian's mouth opened, but no words came out. People were still staring. Someone was filming with a phone now. "Get out," Darren said quietly. Vivian looked at him, her eyes full of disbelief. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "No," Darren replied. "What I regret is not walking away sooner." Vivian turned sharply and stormed out the door, heels clicking like thunder. Silence filled the cafe. Darren turned to Elena. "I'm sorry," he said. "For all of it." Elena looked at him. Her eyes weren't angry, just full of questions. "I don't know what this is between us," she said softly. "But if we keep going, I need to know it's real." Darren nodded. "It is," he said. "And I'll prove it, one day at a time." And just like that, something changed. Not just for Darren, not just for Elena, but for everything ahead of them. Because this wasn't the end of the storm, but it was the first day they faced it, together. The cafe was quiet after Vivian's outburst. The mess had been cleaned up, the spilled coffee wiped from the wall, the broken cup swept away. But something in the air still lingered, a heaviness that couldn't be cleaned with a towel. Darren and Elena sat at the same corner table, their drinks untouched. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight slipped through the windows, casting soft golden light across the floor, as if the world itself was trying to offer a little peace. Darren spoke first. "I never wanted to bring drama into your life." Elena looked down at her hands, folded tightly on the table. "I know," she said quietly. "But sometimes it finds us anyway." He studied her face. She looked calm, but he could see the tiredness behind her eyes. The kind of exhaustion that didn't come from work or lack of sleep, but from carrying too much for too long. "I meant what I said," he continued. "I'm done with Vivian. I'm done with that world. I'm not going back." Elena nodded slowly. "That's a big thing to walk away from." "I didn't lose anything important," he said. "What I had before was money, attention, status, but it wasn't love. It wasn't peace." She finally looked up, meeting his eyes. "Why me, Darren?" she asked again. "You could have anyone. Someone from your world. Someone who fits." He gave a quiet laugh, not mocking, just real. "I've spent years with people who fit. They looked right on paper, sounded perfect at parties. But they didn't see me. Not like you do." Elena's lips curved into a soft smile, but it faded just as quickly. "I'm not perfect, Darren. I live in a small apartment. I wear thrift shop clothes. I can't travel or throw fancy dinners. My life is simple." "Exactly," he said, leaning forward, his voice gentle. "You live with truth. You give without asking. You care about people who can't repay you. That's not simple, Elena. That's rare." She looked away, her throat tightening. The truth in his voice made something inside her ache. "I'm scared," she admitted. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "So am I." That surprised her. "You are." He smiled faintly. "I've built billion-dollar businesses, spoken on stages, debated in boardrooms. But none of that prepared me for sitting in front of someone who could actually break my heart." Her breath caught in her chest. Something about the way he said that cracked through her last bit of resistance. But she wasn't ready to fall just yet. Days turned into weeks. Darren kept coming back. Not with flowers or expensive gifts. With small things. He brought her mother fresh fruit from a local market. He fixed the cafe's broken back door hinge without being asked. He started showing up at closing time, just to help sweep the floors or wipe tables. One night, Elena found him folding paper napkins into little roses while she counted the cash drawer. "You know," she said, raising an eyebrow, "you're ruining your rich man reputation." He grinned. "Good. That guy was boring." They laughed. And it was easy. Natural. But underneath their laughter lived a quiet understanding. They were still learning each other. Still building something fragile, like a bridge between two very different worlds. One evening, Elena didn't come to work. Her manager said her mother had fallen ill again. Darren didn't hesitate. He drove straight to their small apartment. When Elena opened the door, she looked surprised, but relieved. "She's resting," she said, her voice tired. He stepped inside, noticing the peeling wallpaper, the narrow hallway, the scent of medicine mixed with candles. Elena turned to him, her shoulders tense. "I know this isn't the life you're used to." "I'm not here for comfort," he replied. "I'm here for you." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She sank into his chest and finally let herself cry. Quiet sobs, full of fear, stress, and all the weight she had carried alone. Darren held her like she was the most important thing in the world. And for the first time, she let him. A week later, as they walked through a quiet park after work, Elena finally spoke what had been on her heart. "I used to dream of someone like you," she said. "Not because of money or fame, but because you make me feel like I'm allowed to breathe." He stopped walking and turned to her. "And you make me feel like I'm allowed to feel. That I don't have to perform anymore." She took his hand. "I still don't know where this is going. I don't even know if I'm enough." "You are," he said without hesitation. "Exactly as you are." She stepped closer. "So are you," she whispered. "Not as a millionaire. Not as some image. Just as Darren." He leaned in slowly, waiting. She closed the distance. Their first kiss wasn't rushed or dramatic. It was soft, gentle, like a promise whispered between two people who had been waiting for something real. As the sun set behind them and the city lights blinked to life, they stood there, no titles, no walls, no lies. Just two souls, finally choosing to walk forward. Together. The months passed quietly, like pages turning in a well-loved book. Darren and Elena didn't rush things. They walked slowly through their new story, hand in hand, learning, growing, healing. He didn't try to turn her into someone she wasn't. She didn't try to be impressed by his past. Instead, they met in the middle, between wealth and simplicity, between city lights and flickering candles, between a broken past and a hopeful future. Darren stepped away from the public spotlight. He sold his shares in 2 major companies and started investing in local businesses. He didn't want power anymore. He wanted peace. And Elena? She left the cafe, but not because she had to. Because she chose to. They opened a small bakery together in a quiet part of town. The First Cup, they called it, a nod to where it all began. It wasn't flashy, but it was beautiful. Wooden tables, warm lights, handwritten menus, and always the smell of something baking in the oven. They worked side by side. Sometimes she taught him how to knead dough. Sometimes he taught her how to fix the register. And sometimes they just stood there at closing time, flour on their faces, holding hands in the silence, smiling like they had everything in the world. Because in those quiet moments, they did. Darren didn't need a crowd or a stage. One evening, just before sunset, they stood on the rooftop of their building, watching the sky turn orange and pink. He turned to her, heart pounding. "I used to think love had to be loud," he said. "Big rings. Big words. Big shows." Elena smiled softly. "You don't need all that anymore." He nodded, eyes full of emotion. Then he pulled out a small box, not velvet or gold. Just simple wood. Inside was a thin silver ring, shaped like a leaf. "It's not much," he said, "but it's us. And if you'll have me, I want to build a life with you." One day, one breath, one cup of tea at a time. Elena covered her mouth with her hands. Her eyes filled with tears. "It's everything," she whispered. "Yes, Darren. Yes." They didn't rent a ballroom or a mansion. They didn't hire a planner or a celebrity chef. Instead, they married in the small backyard of Elena's childhood home, where her mother now sat in a wheelchair, smiling wider than she had in years. The garden was filled with white and pink flowers. A few friends, a few neighbors, and love. Elena wore a simple white dress her friend had sewn by hand. Darren wore a gray suit with sleeves rolled up. There were no reporters, no diamonds, only music, laughter, and the sound of birds overhead. As they stood beneath a flower arch, Darren looked into Elena's eyes and said, "I spent years surrounded by gold and never felt rich. But you, Elena, you made my heart full the moment you smiled at me behind that counter." And she replied, "I thought I had to survive life alone. But you walked into my storm and waited. You didn't try to fix me. You just stood beside me." They kissed as the sun fell low in the sky. And the world, for once, felt perfectly still. Years later, the first cup became more than a café. It became a place where people came for peace, for warmth, for the story. And sometimes, when customers asked if the rumors were true, that the owner used to be a millionaire who gave it all up for love, Elena would smile and say, "He didn't give up anything. He found everything." And Darren? He would be in the back, rolling dough or brewing chai. Still in love, still thankful, still holding the hand of the girl who reminded him every single day that love isn't about money or names or power. It's about choosing someone, even when the world says you shouldn't, and choosing them again and again, forever. That brings us to the end of this video. If you enjoyed the story, kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel, like and share this video to your friends and loved ones. Thanks for watching.